When accidents, injuries, or emergencies happen, American Medical Response is there. As part of the global medical response family of companies, AMR is committed to its mission of providing care to the world at a moment's notice. As a leading 911 emergency medical response provider within the community, AMR wants to remind you to stay safe, San Diego. To learn more about AMR, visit amr.net.
It's a little bit odd to me. Sorry, hang on. The person cutting cutting my own house down? This is unbelievable.
Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast in partnership with News Radio 600 Kogo. I am Scott Lewis, CEO and Editor-in-Chief at Voice of San Diego, joined as always by Assistant Editor Andrew Keatts. Hello.
What's up, buddy? How are you?
You know, everything's just fine, Managing Editor Sarah Libby was not able to join us this week. We will make sure we can plug her in next week. This is our second show from coronavirusland. Everything is changed, and we're all adjusting to it. We're in our homes now. I ended up coming home finally to work. I was going to the office, and one day I went to the office, and I was leaving, and I said, I'll be back, and my daughter said, well, not if you get the coronavirus and go to the hospital. And that drove it home a little bit that maybe I shouldn't be leaving anymore, so I'm trying to not leave anymore. So bear with us as we make sure this sounds good and all that. Andy, you doing all right?
No, but I'm here to record.
Yeah, it's a taxing moment. We are, if all of you out there that are trying to live new lives with all this stuff going on, we are certainly with you on that. Let's just do a quick update. Last week we talked a lot about Steve Padilla, the Chula Vista City Councilman, who contracted the COVID-19 and ended up in an ICU and in a real rough state, it sounded like. He wasn't the only Democrat. There were several others that got sick. Kelvin Barrios, running for city council for Georgette Gomez's seat in the San Diego City Council in the Mid-City area. He got it, went to the hospital briefly. Will Rodriguez Kennedy, chairman of the Democratic Party, also ended up in an ICU, remains there as at recording time right now. Andy, it sounded like, we don't know what the definition of a cluster is, but there was something that spread through the Democratic leadership.
Yeah, I've carefully avoided using the word cluster only because that seems to have some specific medical connotation that I'm not aware of. But it is clear that, I suppose it's still possible that it's random. I'm not an epidemiologist, but it's clear that a number of Democrats in town have gotten sick. A number of other ones who have not tested positive are sick and believe they may have it, have reason to believe that they were exposed to other people who have tested positive. Some of them have taken tests and are awaiting results. Others haven't bothered to take tests but believe that they're sick. And so what it's really come down to, from most of the Democrats I spoke to, is just that the timing of this really couldn't have been worse between the run-up to the election and the days and weeks after election, with victory parties and people hanging out in social circles with their friends who are also political professionals, because for the first time in a number of months they were able to keep semi-normal hours again. They had a lot of opportunity to expose one another, and so they don't know exactly where it began, but they all believe that they were passing it among one another, and it's created a weird confluence between this public health crisis and local politics.
Yeah, so there was a couple other staffers and folks. It's almost like you described it, I thought, really well the other day. Like, we're all in this weird position where we sneeze or we cough and suddenly our heart races, like, oh my God, did we get it? Do we need to isolate? All those things. It seems like for them it's probably that way times 50. It's just this really uncomfortable situation. They've been around folks who are really struggling with the illness, and yet it's really hard to tell, whether they specifically have it or whether they need to worry about it, any more than any of us do.
Yeah, exactly. And so in the time since this has been in the news, Steve Padilla's condition does seem to have improved. His daughter released a statement saying that his condition has stabilized. Will Rodriguez-Kennedy is still in the ICU, but appears to be doing better. Kelvin is not in the hospital. Johan Espinoza is another political activist and organizer in town who worked on the Amar Campa-Najjar congressional campaign. He is not hospitalized. Andrea Cardenas is a Chula Vista City Council candidate. I spoke to her. She is a presumptive positive. She believes she's positive. She's taken a test. She's awaiting results. And all of these folks know other people who are in the same situation. And it's created a bit of fear, but so far it does not appear that anybody's condition is getting worse, or that the situation is continuing to expand beyond the situation that everybody's in right now.
Yeah, well, on behalf of everybody who follows local politics and public affairs, I'm sure we're all hoping for a speedy recovery for everybody. That's just really drove home just both how widespread the whole thing was, but also how nasty that bug is. So our heart goes out to everybody. Hope they recover well. We're going to talk about a local expert who this week said that this actual week is crucial for social distancing for San Diego. We'll explain why. And lastly, we're going to talk about local governments. They're basically like a fraction of the economy. And so if the economy tanks, well, they tank too. And, a lot of them are better prepared than others for various reasons. Well, let's get into that. So this guy, Forrest Rower, kind of a fascinating story, decides to send his colleagues at San Diego State University. He studies viruses, and he sent his colleagues in the lab there. He said, hey, this is a really important week to worry about social distancing, because let's say it takes 2 weeks for you to catch the virus before you may need to go to the hospital. Well, that means that in 2 weeks from now, if you do the math, then the local hospitals may be overburdened. So let's really work hard to make sure this week doesn't get worse than it might. And that email he sent out ended up going viral. And our contributor, Randy Dotinga, talked to him. Pretty fascinating story. He said, look, this was just for academics in my lab, to tell them what it looks like and where we're at. And, the way things are these days, everybody's just kind of hunting for information. You can tell, like on our site, we have this, gigantic traffic coming to the site, and it's just like normal now. Just, what we used to get in yearly spikes is now just kind of what we get every day. People are just thirsty for information, and this guy really hit a chord.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think for one reason, I think people are just on edge, and so it's like getting another set of guidance, right? Like, you've been being very careful. You're not allowed to leave your home. The number of things you can do outside is none. The number of people you can see outside your family is 0. But especially this week, you can do nothing and see no one. So, I don't actually know exactly what we can do with it, except maybe express further concern about the tendency of people to congregate in parks and beaches that other cities have started to crack down on in the last week. That was sort of the last thing that was still going on. So as far as what we need to do additionally beyond what we've been doing, there doesn't seem to be all that much left.
No, I think that the one thing it really drove home, which is apparently a battle we still have to fight on these forums and platforms and just public understanding in general, is this idea of like, it's not just like people dying, which is awful. It's not just that we're talking about here. You can't just somehow segregate that and be like, well, people die, whatever, people die in all these different ways. Like the worry we're talking about is the overburdening of the hospital and the situation where they're overburdened and can't take care of it. And then we have these tents full of people that are struggling, and a lot of people that can't get health care. And then the actual worst case where we're actually deciding who should die or not. And, that's the worry that we're trying to avoid. And that's what I think he sort of drove home with his piece, which is been driven home in so many other ways, but apparently, again, still needs to be driven home for a lot of people, which is that, look, this is what we're trying to avoid, and if we're trying to avoid that, it really matters this week. And yeah, speaking of the
and Will Huntsberry this week did a story for us that put into context just how precarious those calculations are right now. He had been pushing the county to provide more specific modeling that they were relying on for San Diego County specifically. So we've all seen, I think, those curves that we've been encouraged to bend, but those usually refer to national data, maybe state data. And it's important to keep in mind that every local area sort of has its own curve. And so Will, and my understanding is county supervisors as well, had been pushing county officials to provide San Diego specific data and the modeling for what we could be expecting that curve to look like based on all of the precautions and all the different policies that we've been putting in place. And the upshot of it, they did come out with those visualizations within the last day. And the upshot of it was that if all of the social distancing that we have implemented thus far continues and is followed closely, combined with efforts to increase our hotel capacity, continue to go forward, it is possible that we are on the edge of being able to stay below our hotel capacity, meaning we don't overburden our hotels and get into the situation that you've described.
You mean our hospitals?
Our hospitals, right. So that means everything we're doing, all the social distancing and all the added hospital capacity has the possibility of combining to first delay when we reach capacity, but also to potentially keep us below our ultimate capacity weeks down the line.
Yeah, that mark, that 6 weeks, also drove home too. Just like it seems like the best case scenario is that in 6 weeks we peak, which means, as you pointed out, that in 6 weeks and a day it's still really bad. It's just one day better, and there's a whole downside from that. So buckle up. I mean, this. I've been trying to tell people, use all these different metaphors, marathon, first inning of a ball game or whatever, but we don't even know. It's just, it feels like the dawn of this new reality. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Hi, my name is Darren Schwartz. I'm the Chief Planning and Strategy Officer for the Jewish Federation of San Diego County. How has the coronavirus pandemic affected our business?
We normally meet in the schools, which meant we were shut down a few weeks ago from meeting there, so we've had to move everything online.
Earlier,
Bible
I wouldn't
studies,
have
we prepare
qualified
every
because I
morning.
didn't pay myself enough to qualify, and I'm scared of falling through the cracks, to be totally honest.
We at Voice of San Diego would like to hear from you. This is a big moment for journalists. Everything is moving at a crazy pace, and we're working to keep up. Right now we're focusing on businesses here in San Diego, and we want to hear your stories. How are you keeping your business going? And if you work for a business that's been affected by coronavirus, what's going on there? We'd like you to share your story with a video for a series that we're putting together. You can just record yourself on your computer or with your phone and send that file to our engagement editor. That's Megan Wood, and her email address is megan@vosd.org. Again, send any video file you'd like to megan@vosd.org telling your story about your business. Details in the show notes.
To support us and other small businesses as much as you can through this tragedy.
That's all we can do. So, thanks.
I think that's it. Thank you.
We're hearing from all these federal, state, and local governments about what we should be doing, and the mantra, of course, is just stay away from other people. Employees at the Department of Veterans Affairs say they want to do that, but they're not being allowed to work remotely. Our Maya Sri Krishna, she talked to I think several of them, and came out with how much worry they have, especially after a memo went out from San Diego VA Director Dr. Robert Smith. The memo acknowledged that 5 cases have been identified, 5 cases of the new coronavirus in that building, and county officials are also confirmed they're investigating multiple known cases among VA employees. And so we have yet another example of government saying, you need to stay away from people who need remote work, and yet themselves being unable to pull that off. And the amount of alarm from some of these VA employees was rather striking. Maya really tapped into something with that. I don't, they're saying, well, we need to make sure people can still deliver VA services, but we're not talking about actual, nurses and healthcare providers. I don't think we're talking about people running some of the administrative work, and they're just not figuring out a way to work from home. And some of them are being forced to take actual vacation just to stay away.
Yeah, these employees expressed being put in into a sort of impossible dilemma where they could they could stop working and not get paid. They could take their accrued leave time, or they could go into the office and risk potentially becoming sick. And some of them did become sick, and others have presumed that they have become sick. So it has been, it's been a very bad set of circumstances for VA employees, and it's quite consistent with what we saw from city and county employees last week from another story from Maishra Krishnan, where the city and county governments had been putting in place these guidelines for what other people should be doing that they weren't totally capable of enacting themselves as employers. And so, I mean, one takeaway from this is it seems like our government agencies are woefully behind in just having their workforces networked and capable of shifting to this. I mean, this isn't the only emergency scenario somebody could imagine that might require government services to not be able to report and hopefully still be able to maintain some level of functionality. And if this is a test of that, they're not doing very well on that test. I hesitate to say this is a test because this is just so dire and unprecedented that if this is a test, I'd hate to see the real thing. But my point remains that it doesn't seem like the governments are especially succeeding in how able they are to demonstrate how they've become workforces in the 21st century.
Yeah, so fascinating moment. Of course, she starts doing those kinds of stories, and the tips start flowing in about other agencies, other organizations struggling with similar decisions and risks that their employees are facing. So if you have anything you ever want to share like that, please let us know. You can always send a note to info@voiceofsandiego.org or me at scott@voiceofsandiego.org. And we want to hear from you, especially if you're a healthcare provider or a business owner right now. We've been collecting stories about businesses right on the edge. There's just so many things to tell. It's in a weird way, it's like this incredible bounty of journalistic sourcing and stories to be done that really energizes the staff, but also because everything's so bad and weird and scary. So it's hard to watch everybody be so energized, but also know that that something really bad's happened. So let us know, and we'll try to filter all those stories out. But speaking of local government, so Ashley McGlone, who does a great job studying public finances, went through and checked out which agencies might be best prepared for what's going to happen, which is total catastrophe in their revenues, and which ones aren't. So obvious candidates that aren't, they're places that were already running deficits when the economy was booming and revenues were doing comparatively well. Places like Sweetwater Unified School District, San Diego Unified, and the city of San Diego also was facing a deficit, also has so much of its revenue tied up in these industries that are going to really struggle, like tourism. We get 10%. Is that right? The city gets 10% of its revenues from
give or take.
Yeah, from hotel room taxes, and so that's gone. And so, like literally, it might be zero for this half of the year or something close to it. The city convention center lost 12 events already, and $230 million of economic activity just from those events. So, but then there were a couple that stood out. Like the county is not dependent on those types of revenues. The county of San Diego, which does a lot of public health work, they get a lot more from property taxes, which can't shift that much. And they built up a massive reserve that so many people wanted to spend, which now they can say like, hey, look, it's good we have this. And then another one really shocked me. The international airport, the San Diego Airport Authority, let me be clear, San Diego County Regional Airport Authority has a operating cost every year of about $300 million, but has $800 million in reserves. So basically 2.5 years or more of run rate. And of course, a lot of that they were setting aside to do major construction work. They want to rehab Terminal 1. Our Ashley McGlone tried to check with them to see if that project was still on. You know, it could use some construction jobs, it seems, but also the airlines are not doing well. And they were kind of cagey about really responding, it sounds like. So there's a lot of questions up in the air, but what stood out for you when you look at, you did another piece just at the resilience of local governments. What are you thinking about all that?
Well, I think there is a story to be told about, you know, from a you know, public policy perspective, how the best ways to fund government are. And when you have government funded by variable sources like sales taxes or hotel taxes, you do put yourself in a vulnerable position. And that is, you know, that's a story that's been told in the past, so-called fiscal zoning, that cities presumably have some sort of incentive to tilt their land towards retail uses as opposed to housing, because they get a larger share, because relative to counties, say, they get a larger share of their revenue from sales taxes than they do from property taxes. Although the city does receive some property taxes, and that's the stable part of their budget right now. So I think there is a lesson there, but of course that would take a pretty revolutionary endeavor to change the way we fund local governments. You know, the other thing I thought was that it was MTS, by the nature of how it's funded. Those sorts of agencies are advised to keep much higher reserve levels, and they have. So they're sort of in a situation where even though they're losing so much revenue from the decline in ridership, which you know, actually, you know, ridership fare revenue amounts to about like 1/3 of their annual revenue. But because that's the case, they are advised to keep much healthier reserves, which they have. And so MTS, at least for now, through the end of March, has said that it's not going to cut service. The thinking on that is both that they don't want to lay people off during a crisis, and also by keeping the buses and trains that they do run on these really frequent intervals, well, frequent by San Diego standards, I should say, frequent intervals, that keeps the people who are forced to ride them for one reason or another. It makes it much easier for them to observe social distancing when they're in the train. They're not going to have any packed buses, which might be the case if you went down to, say, like one bus an hour or something like that. So I don't know. Those are the things I'm thinking of right now. I think maybe more than that, what I'm thinking about is just what a fragile status quo we live in. That something like this in 2 weeks can send an economy that was in the midst of the longest expansion in its history into a situation where many governments are contemplating how quickly they'll have to make major staffing cuts. And my understanding is city departments are issuing their proposed cuts right now. The state government has acknowledged that its budget is basically moot and it will need to start from scratch. All of the budgeting it had been doing is now irrelevant. So yeah, I don't know. I guess my basic takeaway is that when every transaction in an economy stops, there aren't many good things that happen, whether that's in household budgets, business budgets, or government budgets.
Yeah, that's what got me. I mean, they were talking about the federal stimulus effort. I'm like, what are you stimulating? Like, everything is stopped. Like
it is not a stimulus. It's a relief package. It is
yeah,
a
exactly.
relief
They kept using
package.
that word. I'm like, there is no. That's a spark plug that's never going to fire. That's this is just why I understand we need to get checks out or we need to save some things while we're hibernating or whatever. But it is off. There is nothing happening, and even the stuff that is happening is a lot of purchasing that won't actually help governments and sales taxes and stuff like that. There was one of the other ones I was watching in San Diego Unified School District was already dealing with a major deficit. And now they've announced that by April 27th, they're going to implement this distance learning, which was great. A lot of parents and such are worried about what's, losing momentum on education. Lorena Gonzalez, Assemblywoman, responded, though, hey, hopefully this plan, though, will be realistic and does not rely on an extra $1 billion in funding from the state. And I wrote back $1 billion. Is San Diego Unified asked for that? She said, no, if you add up all the districts and what they want, it comes up to $1 billion. And, the state's going to be strapped. But, I think she was kind of implying that the district might be trying to ask for more money for this distance learning thing in a way that's just trying to cover up its already existing deficit. So there's a lot of agencies that were right on the edge as well. So it's just a really crazy moment. We hope that everybody can hang on to it. So,
well, I mean, to your point about improperly referring to this package that just passed as stimulus as opposed to relief. I mean, every local government is being asked to do something to keep the doors open for small businesses, to help residents, to keep government workers employed. To be responsible employers, and all of them are at the same time losing their access to revenue, and they're going to look to the next government above them for a bailout. I hesitate to use the term bailout because it suggests that they undertook some sort of moral hazard that they now have to atone for, as opposed to just being hit with an unprecedented pandemic. But, the cities, school districts, transit districts, municipal agencies of all kind are going to look to the state for some sort of infusion, the federal government for some sort of infusion. And this package does include money for state and local governments, but it's going to go quickly. And, there's no real reason to believe why the situation causing that lack of revenue is going to stop anytime soon. So I presume, I think it's like $250 billion was set aside for state and federal government, or state and local governments. That's going to go very quickly. So I don't want to hit school districts too much for looking for more revenue when we have every reason to believe they're in the same situation as everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, like this disease, this virus is being spread literally by the economy, and the economy is being shut down to stop the spread of the virus. And so, a lot of people are talking and they're saying, well, I don't want to reopen the economy just to save people's, investments in the Dow Jones Industrial Average or whatever. Like, we're talking about, Todd Gloria announced the other day, I still am shocked by it. There's usually 2,000 unemployment claims per day in the state of California, and now they're running at about 107,000 per day. I mean, we're tracking quickly to 1 million plus, 2 million plus more, unemployed folks than there were just a couple of weeks ago. And so when we're talking about shutting down the economy and the cost of it, we're not talking about the Dow Jones. Yeah, that's an indicator of some things that are happening. We're talking about this wholesale correction of people just being thrown out of their livelihoods for who knows how long. And so while I'm here sitting and trying to help people understand why we're shutting down the economy, why we're dealing with this, because it'd be worse if we let it ravage the economy as a virus. And nobody wants to shop or come be a tourist in a place where the hospitals are overburdened and senior citizens are dying at an incredible rate, and you're worried about getting that sick if you go to a restaurant. So, I mean, this has to stop, and we have to contain it, so I understand. But you can't write this off as, somebody's portfolio that we're worried about. We're worried about the entire system of how people make money and stay alive. And while I'm for doing this, let's not write off those concerns in any way. That's just it's hard to even picture how we can recover from that.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, it's even in 2008, the recession then did not make as clear as this has the extent to which all the economy is the sum total of our human interactions, and that's what we're looking at right now.
Yeah,
So,
that was an example of like people were unwilling to take risk, like invest, hire people,
right.
borrow money so they can expand their house. Everything that makes an economy bigger and better, they weren't willing to do. And so a stimulus, you could kind of see what that meant. Like, okay, we need to provide that confidence back. Confidence doesn't matter right now. There is no exchange of transaction or services happening. It's crazy. It's just like...
I mean, it's so, and I think I talked about this a little bit last week, but, when things really started to get real here, we started trying to put out some requests to different industries to give us some big picture data about what was happening with hotel occupancy, or what was happening in transit ridership, what was happening in the flights coming in, that sort of thing, border crossings, just to see if we could track what was happening in the economy. Now, 2 weeks later, like, those numbers are not very helpful. Like the number, like, what is the difference between a 70% drop and an 80% drop? They both seem imaginary to me. They both are so far beyond anything that you've ever conceptualized that it's like fairy dust. It doesn't help me understand the situation anymore because the numbers are too big. It's like saying that something costs $1 bajillion. It just, at a certain point, it just becomes an imaginary number.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be following this. We have, like I said, this journalism team has always been productive, but it's never been more so. And the amount of attention on our stories has never been anything close to this for anything close to this sustained amount of time. And we're doing it all because we want to help you understand what's happening as best we can and investigate so we can hold these officials accountable, and also make sure that the best decisions possible are being made out there, and that they see things that they might not have otherwise seen as we are able to uncover them. And so if you have any information you want us to know or to consider reporting, go to voiceofsandiego.org, email me at scott@voiceofsandiego.org, Andy@voiceofsandiego.org. We will listen and see what we can do. We're getting inundated with ideas, but we can handle it. And we want to hear from you. And, we decided we would either be victims of what was happening, or we'd be engaged and relevant. And that's the only path forward for us. So thank you to everybody who supports us out there. It's obviously extremely valuable, and we appreciate it. Thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast, the most popular public affairs podcast, recorded not in downtown San Diego, but from my Ocean Beach headquarters, probably the most popular here. And it's usually recorded in the Bob Nelson Charitable Fund studios in downtown San Diego. Thank you, Bob Nelson Charitable Fund. If you want to keep up with everything we're doing at Voice, the best way to do that is with the Morning Report. Subscribe to that at vosd.org/newsletters. I'm Scott Lewis, CEO and Editor-in-Chief. Andrew Keatts is Assistant Editor. Sarah Libby's Managing Editor. And this show is produced by Nate John, Megan Wood, and Adriana Heldies. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.